This afternoon's first speaker is Michael Wright. In this session, you will learn about the many types of records held at the National Archives that can further your research on Native Americans. Archivist Michael Wright will show you how to find records relating to Native Americans living in Indian Territory, including the Dawes Rolls as well as other related documents. Michael Wright was born and raised in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He's an archivist who has been with the National Archives at Fort Worth since 2004. In addition to being the preservation liaison for the region, Michael has worked extensively with National Aeronautics and Space Administration records, the Bureau of Indian Affairs records, and federal court records. He has presented programs on the National Archives, given countless tours, assisted with teacher in-service training and classroom programs, and has worked with the Citizen Archivist Program. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in History in 2008 and his Master of Arts degree in American History in 2011 from the University of Texas in Arlington. Please welcome Michael Wright.
Hey guys, thanks for joining me today. And as she said, today we're going to talk about some of the Native American records that we have at the National Archives here at Fort Worth, and hopefully give you a little bit of understanding of what we have and ways to find them. We like to point out that the National Archives in Fort Worth outside of D.C. has the largest holdings of Native American records. That is because of Oklahoma and what was Indian Territory. The role of the archives, if you may have already learned, we are responsible for the preservation and access to permanent records created by the federal government, which contains the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which had control over the Indian Territory. This is a listing of a lot of tribes that we cover here in Fort Worth. These will all be out of Indian Territory. As you can see, there are quite a few, and pretty much what we'll be focusing on today will be what we call the 5 civilized tribes, or the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Creek, and Seminole. And if you're interested in any other tribes that may not be on this list, they could be held at other regions throughout the nation, and it's just a good idea to check all the National Archives. So during the administration of President Andrew Jackson, it became the policy of the federal government to move all Indians living in the East to Indian Territory, which is west of the Mississippi River. Treaties which provided for ceding land in the east and moving to land in now what is the eastern half of Oklahoma were negotiated with the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Seminoles, and Cherokees. Some Indians moved voluntarily with the assistance of agents from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the War Department, but many tribal members opposed relocation, and the Army forcibly removed these large groups of Creeks and Cherokees, and as well as the Seminoles, which require an extensive military campaign. And many of us know this forced relocation of the 5 tribes as the Trail of Tears. And as you can see on this map, a lot of what we'll be discussing today is out of the eastern portion of Oklahoma and Indian Territory. When the federal government was established in 1789, large areas of the southeastern United States were in possession of the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole tribes, which are commonly referred to as the 5 civilized tribes, because they had established schools, churches, and a system of government modeled after the federal government. In 1874, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole agencies were consolidated to form the Union Agency with its headquarters at Muskogee in Creek Nation. Following the removal, each tribe reestablished elected tribal government, tribal courts, and a school system, and managed its own affairs within its boundaries. All of our series out of Record Group 75, which is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, are on what we commonly refer to as OPA, which is Online Public Access. Online Public Access is a prototype which provides a centralized or streamlined means of searching multiple National Archives resources at once. OPA allows you to search all of the catalog records from Archival Research Catalog, which we call ARC or ARC, records from the Electronic Records Archives or ERA, and all of the web pages that are on archives.gov and the Presidential Library. It's a simple search. You can enter one or more keywords in the basic search box, and it will provide all the results on one page from ARC, archives.gov, Presidential Libraries, on OPA. And so what we've done in Fort Worth is all of our series or descriptions of our records out of the Bureau of Indian Affairs are on OPA and is searchable. So when you're starting the DAWS research, it's important to know that there was a passage of the General Allotment Act in 1887, and it marked a major change in the federal Indian policy as the government sought to divide tribal lands among individual Indians. The 5 civilized tribes were exempted from the General Allotment Act primarily because of legal questions about their land title, but Congress passed an act in 1893 which authorized the establishment of a commission to negotiate agreements with each tribal government which would provide for individual allotments. Former Senator Henry L. Dawes of Massachusetts was appointed chairman of the commission, which is why we commonly refer to this as the Dawes Commission. The Dawes Commission was created not to administer the act, but to attempt to persuade the tribes excluded under the General Allotment Act to agree to the allotment plan. This commission is what registered many of the 5 civilized tribes and the Indian names on the roll. So you can see here's a picture of Senator Dawes. And on leaving the Senate in 1893, Dawes became the chairman of the commission to the 5 civilized tribes, or what we call the Dawes Commission, and served in this capacity for 10 years, negotiating with the tribes for the extinction of the communal title to their land and for the dissolution of the tribal governments with the object of making the tribes a constituent part of the United States. In order to allot the land to individual Indians, it was necessary for the Dawes Commission to determine the membership of each tribe. Prior to 1896, the tribal governments exercised exclusive jurisdiction over citizenship. Senator Dawes and the other commissioners visited tribal leaders but had no success convincing them to negotiate agreements. Many tribal members strongly opposed allotment. In 1895, Congress authorized a survey of Indian territory, and in 1896, the Dawes Commission was authorized to add names to existing tribal rolls as a preliminary step to allotment. The Commission received more than 7,500 applications for enrollment and traveled throughout Indian Territory, conducting hearings and enrolled more than 2,000 people. The Act also authorized appeals of the Commission's decisions to the U.S. courts for the Northern, Central, and Southern Districts of Indian Territory, and more than 1,000 appeals were made. The court upheld most of the Commission's decisions, but admitted several hundred persons to citizenship over the objections of the tribal government. Applicants were required to submit written applications to the Commissioner's office or to traveling enrollment parties within the 90 days allowed by the Act. A copy of the application also had to be sent to the appropriate tribal government. Each tribe was asked to provide the Dawes Commission with a copy of its last authenticated roll, but tribal governments once again objected strongly to the interference in citizenship matters and provided little cooperation. So when searching for the 1896 applications online, these are going to be your basic instructions on Ancestry.com. We have partnered with Ancestry.com, and they have come in and digitized all the applications and put them online. And the best way to do it is to search under the database and card catalog and enter in the keywords U.S. Native American applications for enrollment in 5 civilized tribes, 1896, or certain keywords of that phrase. And then you'll select the applications from the title list, and you can either enter the name or hit enter, and you can browse the collection for the tribe. And on OPA, as I mentioned earlier, Online Public Access has an index only online. So what records will you find when searching for the 1896? Well, it could essentially lead to a gold mine if, due to the process of the 1896 application. There are vital records submitted as proof, may include birth certificates, marriage license, letters, and affidavits. Once again, there was over 7,500 applications, but most were rejected, and the commission only enrolled about 2,000. Here's an example of one of the applications that you could find on Ancestry.com. And as I was saying, an information goldmine. If you take a look at this, you can see some of the information it provides. It says, in the matter of the claim of Elisha Baxter for citizenship in Choctaw Nation, the applicant states he is claiming for citizenship in Choctaw Nation, that his age is 40 years old, and that gives his post office, which is where he's living. It says the applicant would further state that he is an intermarried citizen, which means he's married to a Native American of the Choctaw Nation, having married Miss Caroline Stewart, Choctaw Indian by blood, in the year of 1874 on September 29th. The applicant further states that he is married according to the laws of Choctaw Nation governing marriage of white United States citizens and citizens of the Choctaw Nation. So as you can see, once again, you have his age, you have where he's living, and you have who he's married to, and when they got married. So lots of information to be obtained from these files. Along with that information, as we stated, you sometimes can find the actual marriage certificate or marriage license. So what we have here is a handwritten marriage license, and it pretty much is stating the exact same information as we just read off, saying when they were wed, which is in September 29th of 1874, and it says who conducted the ceremony, and it's signed by the superintendent. And so some very fascinating records can be found in this. So the Act also authorized appeals of the Commission's decisions for the U.S. courts for the Northern, Central, and Southern Districts of Indian Territory, and more than 1,000 appeals were made. The courts upheld most of the Commission's decisions, but admitted several hundred persons to citizenship over the objection of tribal governments. So if you were not allowed onto the 1896 census, you could appeal the decision and take it to court, and then they would listen to you and hear why you thought you needed to be on the roll. And these documents are on microfilm, and eventually Ancestry is working to create a Native American page on their site. And so hopefully within a year or so, these can be put online and searchable. But until then, if you are searching for these records, you can send in a written request to us in Fort Worth, and we can make copies of the records and send them to you, or digitize them and email them to you. And this is just an example of an 1896 appeal. As you can see here, it says in the matter of the application of W.J. Watts et al., he's wanting to be enrolled as a citizen of Cherokee Nation to the Commission of the 5 Tribes. You will, in compliance with the order of this court, transmit this office as soon as practical the following papers now in your custody. Said papers to be used in this court or the hearing of the above case, to wit, papers and affidavits of the cases of, and it gives more names. So this is somebody appealing to be put on to the 1896 census. Okay, so these appeals came in the U.S. District Court for the Central District of Indian Territory of South McAllister, and the U.S. District Court for the Southern District came in Ardmore. These are not available online. You can also see the Choctaw Chickasaw Citizenship Court, and these are for the Choctaw and Chickasaw appeals. And essentially, they had to set up this court because of the vast amounts of appeals that laid the groundwork for this CCCC. And so we'll talk about that here in just a second. This here is an example of the Choctaw Chickasaw appeals. Once again, it's just a person appealing to be listed on the rolls, and it says to the Honorable Dawes Commission out of Fort Smith, Arkansas. It says you're hereby notified that this person is appealing to the court for the decision rendered by the application, and so they are trying to get on to the Choctaw roll. And so, as I mentioned, they have the creation of the Choctaw Chickasaw Citizenship Court cases because of the vast amount of individuals who were appealing their cases. So both the Choctaw and Chickasaw tribal governments strongly objected to the enrollment activities of the Dawes Commission. And in 1902, Congress established a Choctaw Chickasaw Citizenship Court and authorized either tribe to seek annulment of the decisions that have been made by the U.S. Court in Indian Territory. This led to the case of the Choctaw Chickasaw Nations or Tribes versus J.T. Riddle et al., which vacated all the judgments of the U.S. courts for the Central and Southern Districts of Indian Territory. Persons involved in those decisions were required to institute proceedings in the CCCC to regain enrollment. Cases originating in the U.S. Court for the Central District were heard by the CCCC at South McAllister, and cases from the Southern District at Tishomingo. And what we have here is just a database that was created by our volunteers here in Fort Worth, and it is a database to all the names for the Choctaw Chickasaw Citizenship Court cases. This is online on OPA, so you can go on there if you find out that an individual you are researching did appeal their case. You can go on here and do a name search, and this is what you will find. And it gives the information, gives their name, gives their tribe that they are claiming under, the CCCC number. It gives the Dawes Census Card number, what court the case was heard out of, the case number, and any remarks that they felt were necessary. And as you can see, a lot of it says whether or not they were denied or dismissed or accepted. So what you will find in the CCCC files, briefs or testimonies, exhibits, and once again, marriage licenses, memorandum of arguments submitted by attorneys, the opinions of the court, Once again, these are on microfilm, not online yet. And like we said earlier, if you find these, normally the cases are quite large with a lot of information, and if you're not really concerned on the verdict because so many of them were rejected, that can lead to a lot of information for genealogical resources. So after the appeals, you have the final roll. The 1896 Act only authorized the Dawes Commission to add names to existing rolls, but the Curtis Act of 1898 gave it the power to prepare an entirely new roll for each tribe, which would become the official basis for allotment. An enrollment division was established in Muskogee. For each tribe, and enrollment clerks were assigned to each of the Commission's land offices to receive applications. Enrollment parties traveled throughout Indian Territory, accepting applications, holding hearings, and gathering evidence. Many full-blood Indians opposed allotment and refused to apply for enrollment, forcing the Commission's staff to seek out individuals who appeared on earlier tribal rolls but who refused to apply. All decisions of the Commission were sent to the Secretary of Interior for final approval. The Commission enrolled individuals under many categories, including citizens by blood, citizens by marriage, newborn citizens by blood, minor citizens by blood, freedmen, which are former slaves of tribal members, newborn freedmen, and minor freedmen. And then the Delaware Indians, who had been adopted by the Cherokees, were enrolled as a separate group. And the rules governing the enrollment of each tribe were contained in the agreements negotiated between the Dawes Commission and the tribal governments. Overall, the Commission received applications covering more than 250,000 people and eventually enrolled over 101,000 people, which are commonly called the final rolls of the five civilized tribes. The rolls were closed in 1907 and by an act of Congress, and then 312 people were added on the rolls as late as 1914. And once again, these are on OPA when you start your research. This is the final rolls index that is online. It's essentially all it is an index. And it gives the name of the person, the tribe that they are a part of. It gives their age, the sex of the person. It gives their roll number or card number, which is important when doing research, especially if you're going to want to do reference on the Dawes roll, because if you send us any reference wanting copies from something, if you can't get it online, we will need the Dawes card number and their enrollment number, and this index gives you both. The Dawes roll, as well as being on OPA, is on Fold 3. And when searching on Fold 3, they have both what we call the Dawes cards and the enrollment jackets. Best way we have found to do it is there's a couple different ways. You can either do it by historical era and search in other collections, and then do Native American collections. And eventually you will find the Dawes enrollment cards or Dawes packets. Or you can search a name in the search field, and when you get the results, you can either select Dawes enrollment cards or Dawes packets under the collection title. And here we have a screenshot of what is on fold3.com, and this is the search bar that you can do. It gives you a little bit of background information, tells you what microfilm this came from, and then, like I said, there's the search bar where you can enter a name and then get your results from there. And I believe these are also on Ancestry.com, but we always recommend searching both sites. Fold3 has kind of refocused their information to be more military, but they do have a lot of other records pertaining to other topics, such as Native American records. So we just suggest you always check more than one site. And here is an example of a Dawes enrollment card that you will find on Fold 3. Members of the Chickasaw tribe were permitted to settle on land in Choctaw Nation. That's why you see it says Chickasaw Nation, and then Chickasaw Roll. So the Chickasaws established an independent tribal government but retained the rights of Choctaw citizenship and extended Chickasaw citizenship rights to the Choctaws. The Atoka Agreement became the basis for Choctaw and Chickasaw enrollment, and allotment recognized this dual citizenship and permitted members of either tribe to select tracts of land within the boundaries of either or both tribal nations. And the Dawes Commission added over 3,000, close to 4,000 Choctaws and 942 Chickasaws to the tribal rolls, and the U.S. Courts in Indian Territory admitted another 2,100 Choctaws and close to 600 Chickasaws. And as we've already stated, the Choctaw and Chickasaw tribal governments were strongly opposed to any interference by the Dawes Commission, and that's what brought about the Choctaw-Chickasaw Citizenship Court, which we've already discussed. So, looking at this card, it's important to notice all the information that can be retained from just this one card. As you can see, I've circled just a couple different examples on here, but even starting up at the top, you can see it gives the name, it gives the sex of the person, it gives how much their blood quantum is, which a lot of people like to know. And down further in the bottom portion, it refers you to other cards or other information that can be found on these individuals. It says one person is married to another person who isn't on this card, but it gives the card information for that individual. And so it's always good to just read the whole card. We always say start at the top and work your way down to the bottom and see what you can get. When it came time to the Cherokees, the Commission relied primarily on the Cherokee census of 1880 and 1896 to verify eligibility for enrollment. Many full-bloods refused to apply, and some were even sent to jail for violating a 1904 court order requiring their appearance before the Commission. Tribal officials strongly objected to the enrollment, once again, of freedmen, and secured a court injunction in 1903, which halted the enrollment process for a few months. Many whites who had married Cherokee citizens applied for enrollment and were denied. In a ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1906 upheld the Commission's decision, which was based on a Cherokee law which denied citizenship to anyone who married after 1877. And so this is a Cherokee rejected card. Once again, there's a vast amount of information that can be found on this card, and it is rejected, so this means the person was not allowed on the roll, but they do have a card. They just don't have an enrollment number, and they will have an allotment jacket, which we'll discuss here briefly, and that should give you information as to why they may have been rejected. This is a Mississippi Choctaw rejected. Mississippi Choctaw says under the Choctaw Removal Treaty, any Choctaw could remain in Mississippi as a citizen of the United States and still receive 160 acres of land by registering with the Indian agent. The Dawes Commission was required to investigate the right of the Mississippi Choctaws to enrollment and allotment. And a lot of them who stayed back but eventually moved were rejected, and this is one of the cards that shows that it was rejected. We are currently trying to get them online, but they are not indexed on OPA just yet. But the cards are on OPA, just not the index. This is a Dawes Freedman card. And then once again, this is for a slave that was owned by one of the tribal members at one point. They were allowed to be on certain rolls, and this is out of Seminole Nation. And as you can see, it gives, once again, the names and information of each of the individuals. And it's always important for the freedman cards to always check the back side of the card. And on the back side of the card, you'll see it will give like the name of the father or the mother of the individuals, as well as the slave owner who owned the individual before they became a citizen on these rolls. So the next part of the DAWS enrollment, as well, you start out with the cards, and then you have the enrollment jackets, which is going to be transcripts of their testimony taken that they gave to the commission when applying for citizenship. And as well, like the 1896 census, you can get certain vital records such as birth and death affidavits and marriage licenses with these as well. Here we have an example of one of the testimonies given for a Chickasaw enrollment jacket. And as you can see, some of the information you can get, it says, what is your name? Tandy C. Walker. It says, what is your post office address? And it tells where she lives. Are you Chickasaw by blood? Yes, sir. And are you on the approved roll? She says, yes, sir, number 1. First one to break the ice. So she is number 1 for the Chickasaw roll. It says, ask her if she knows a person and ask what her relation to her, if any. Says it is his wife. When were you married to her? It says in 65, assuming 1865. Do you know the month? He says June, if he's not mistaken. And where were you married? Tells where were they married. And so it just gives a lot of information, once again, that can be valuable when doing genealogical research. And here is an example of a marriage certificate that can be found in the enrollment jacket. So with enrollment, you have the allotment jacket. And the Dawes Commission allotted more than 15 million acres of land to the persons that enrolled as members on the 5 civilized tribes. The land was allotted by value rather than by number of acres in accordance with various agreements. And cash payments were made to Indians who received land worth less than the standard value of an allotment, and to children who were enrolled after the land available for allotment had been selected. So, in these allotment jackets, there are printed forms, they have transcripts, plat maps that show their land that they are getting, contested allotment records. Sometimes Native Americans would come and they would, 2 or more would contest or put that they wanted the same plot of land, and the commission had cases where they would determine who had the better claim to it. And then there's letters of guardianship or administration regarding minors, and receipts for allotment certificates and certificates of eligibility. Right now, these land allotment files can be found on FamilySearch.org. This is a free website that can be searched from home. If you can see here, we normally tell you to search by state is the easiest way to find it. So you search for all the records out of Oklahoma, and as you can see, there's only 5 different series out of Oklahoma. And then you select the Oklahoma applications for allotment. And then you go to the next page, and you can see that they've broken it down into all the different fields that they enrolled the Native Americans under, as I listed off a few of them earlier. And as you can see, there's a lot of them here: Creek, Freedmen, Delaware, Cherokees, minor Chickasaws by blood. So that's the best way to search for those on Family Search. And here is an example of the allotment jackets that you will find on FamilySearch.org. With these, with the legal description of the land, if the land is still not kept in the family through the descendants, you can go back to the particular county with this legal description and find out what happened to the land after it was allotted to whoever it was. A lot of times they sold it off for money, and so many of the descendants today probably still do not have this land. We always recommend to look other places than just online. These are a lot of documents and records that are related to the Dawes Roll that have not been digitized yet, so they are not online, and the only way to find them is on microfilm publications. Many of these are here in Fort Worth, and some of them can be found in other regions throughout the nation. But once again, Ancestry is working on digitizing many of these rolls, and eventually, hopefully sometime next year, late next year, these will be up and online. Other records relating to Dawes Roll, the Dawes Roll, are probate case files. It says in 1904, Congress transferred jurisdiction over probate and guardianship matters from tribal courts to the federal courts in Indian Territory, and then when Oklahoma was admitted as a state in 1907, the county courts assumed jurisdiction over all the probate proceedings. And so what you'll find in these are just correspondence and copies of papers filed in the state and federal courts, appraisals of land, and what you're seeing here is an index that was created, once again, by our volunteers and staff here in Fort Worth, and it is available on online public access or OPA. We'll very briefly discuss a few of the other tribes that we, or more than just a few of the other tribes that we have here in Fort Worth. Spent the bulk of the day talking about the Dawes because that is what makes up most of our Native American records here. And so we'll very quickly go through some of the other records that can be found for the other tribes. Once again, we go back to this map. As you can see, the eastern portion, which we just pretty much discussed for the 5 civilized tribes, but the entire rest of the territory has a numerous other tribes in which we have records for. And just a listing of what we have out of some of these. For the Concho Agency, we have Arapaho and Cheyenne, the Kiowa Agency, as you can see, Comanche and Wichita affiliated bands, the Miami Agency, and the list just keeps going on. Osage, we have Pawnee, and we have Shawnee, and all the tribes that fall under them. And the type of records that you can find for these other tribes, a lot of them have been microfilmed. A lot of the census rolls for these tribes on M595. That can be found on fold3.com or ancestry.com, as well as microfilm. There are land records, such as schedules of allotments, which we discussed with like the Dawes roll, but as well as other tribes, and leases and patents. We have annuity rolls for payments to individual tribe members, and IIM files, which is individual Indian money files for restricted Indians. And the land transaction files include various types of materials, such as land patents and copies of airships. And then we have airship or probate files, which we just discussed briefly. And BIA was responsible for probating the states of restricted Indians. And then we have school records, There were a number of Indian boarding schools in Indian Territory in Oklahoma, so we have those records as well. And this is just an example of what you'll find on that M595 microfilm publication, the Indian Census Rolls for 1885 to 1940. This is a Cheyenne Arapaho Indian Census roll, and it's just an example of what you can find on there. And as I mentioned, we have school records. This is the Chilocco School. It was a non-reservation Indian school in Chilocco, Oklahoma. It closed in 1980. This particular example is a page from the 1901 Register of Students. And you have to keep in mind that some of these school records are restricted for privacy reasons for up to 72 years. So we always like to remind everybody we don't necessarily know everything about your family or research topic, and thoroughness of the information depends on the accuracy of the census taker. And we cannot correct or add any additional information to any government document that we currently have. We're always welcoming you to come check us out at our regions or online. We're proud of what we do, and I appreciate you listening today. And this is our contact information in Fort Worth. If you do have any questions or for anything that I may have skipped over today, or if you have any reference requests, our email there is ftworth.archives@nar.gov. You have our webpage, which is archives.gov and /Fort Worth, then our mailing address. And if you're in the area, we welcome you to come visit us here at 2600 West 7th Street. We got computers and microfilm, and we have monthly talks here, so we welcome you. And now I guess I will open up to any questions that there might be.
Michael, thank you so much for your presentation. We have several questions for you. Let's start with the most recent. Are there records for the Wampanoag, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Wampanoag. Are there records for this group?
Well, off the top of my head, I am not familiar with that particular group. What I can suggest is sending in a request, and we will do the best to find out what information we do have or is out there, and we can help direct you.
Thank you. Our next question is, though focused on the Oklahoma Territory, how far back do records go in the Northeast?
That is a good question. Because I have only worked here in Fort Worth, I can only pretty much discuss what we have here in Fort Worth, which is out of Oklahoma Territory. I believe if you were to contact one of our other regions, particularly New York or Boston or Philly, they will be able to help you with the Bureau of Indian Affairs records that they have up there.
Thank you, Michael. Our next question is pretty specific. It says, Mission Indian in San Diego, 1852. What tribe would one be referring to? Again, they said Mission Indian in San Diego, 1852. What tribe?
Once again, I don't know the answer to that one. That is pretty specific, and Once again, with it dealing with something in San Diego, California, I don't have much information on that. I can only point you to our San Bruno or Laguna Niguel regions, and I'm sure they'd be more than helpful to answer your question.
Thank you, Michael. Our next question is, where would I find information about Native Americans before the land allotments?
Before the land allotment into Oklahoma, probably your best bet would be in the archives in Washington, D.C. or College Park, because before they got to Oklahoma, they would not be here in Fort Worth.
Thank you, Michael. And our next question is outside of your area, but this is a good general question.
Okay.
St. Joseph's in San Diego has native records. Are these documents available to NARA?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part?
The question is, St. Joseph's in San Diego has native records. Are these documents also available at the National Archives?
It depends on the type of records that they are. If they were a part of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they would definitely be a part of the National Archives. If they are just local records, then more than likely they would not be at the National Archives. But without knowing exactly what St. Joseph's is, I can't be too sure.
Thank you, Michael. And our last question has to do with Indian school children. The person is wondering if we have at the National Archives online the documents that were used to send children to Indian school. So what they actually say is, do we have the sending documents for children to Indian school available online?
I do not believe the school records are online due to privacy restrictions, as I mentioned, because of those that have to be 72 years or older, and I think it would be difficult to put them online, but maybe one day they might be online. But currently, I do not think so.
Thank you, Michael, and that concludes all of our questions. If you have additional questions, please send them to inquire@nara.gov.